One day after holding smog hearings, EPA now prepares to issue new rules for ethanol emissions. Also, yesterday's trip to New Hampshire now has the president trying to shake a potential controversy over his cap and trade comments. And protesters greet Ken Salazar on his trip to Massachusetts. His latest comments about the Cape Wind controversy.
From the Energy News Center in Washington, D.C., this is the Energy Report with Susan McGinnis.
Good Wednesday morning. I'm Tyler Suiters in for Susan McGinnis. Thanks for joining us for the Energy Report on this third day of February 2010. New rules for measuring emissions for biofuel production are due out as soon as today from EPA. The White House has already signed off on a proposed rulemaking known as the Second Renewable Fuel Standard, more commonly called RFS2, one that had been delayed since late last year. Now, the standard could include a requirement that corn-based ethanol produce less carbon dioxide over its life cycle than gasoline. The ethanol industry opposes the life cycle emissions requirement, which would include emissions from land cleared abroad resulting from growth of biofuel crops here in the U.S., the so-called indirect land use effect. The plan could also reduce the U.S. mandate for cellulosic ethanol. 100 million gallons is the requirement this year. Investments in biofuels are down right now because of the recession and tight credit markets. And biofuels will be one of the main topics at the White House later today. President Obama will meet with a bipartisan group of governors this afternoon to discuss energy policy, specifically the biofuels industry and the coal sector. 11 governors are invited to attend the meeting with the president and vice president. You can see their respective states highlighted on this map. The majority of the governors come from major coal producers and coal users: West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, along with South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana. An Obama administration official says the president will raise the topic of carbon capture and storage technologies today. Also, he's expected to lay out a government strategy to boost biofuel development and address their environmental challenges. Now, the meeting comes as the White House is scheduled to release a report from the Biofuels Interagency Working Group. That team was established last year to help spur biofuel investment and make that industry more environmentally friendly. The Des Moines Register says the biofuel report will set targets for commercialization of new types of fuel crops, things like switchgrass, and recommend that the government work regionally to develop fuels and feedstocks that best fit various regions of the country. Here in Washington, as the Senate wrangles with a new energy bill, President Obama is acknowledging that cap and trade is a controversial part of the debate and says it could get left behind. But speaking at a town hall meeting in Nashua, New Hampshire yesterday, the president defended cap and trade as a proven way to price carbon and to create incentives for innovation without creating a large government bureaucracy. Now, the controversial cap and trade system has become a divisive issue in the Senate. We've reported on this a number of times. The president has admitted it was conceivable the Senate would separate cap and trade out. That led to a spate of headlines yesterday and today saying the president was retreating from his support of cap and trade and declaring the provision dead. Well, despite those comments in New Hampshire yesterday, the White House has rejected that interpretation.
Here's the only thing I would say. The most controversial aspects of the energy debate that we've been having, the House passed an energy bill, and people complained about, well, there's this cap and trade thing. The only thing I would say about it is this. We may be able to separate these things out. And it's conceivable that that's where the Senate ends up.
A New England trip for Interior Secretary Ken Salazar also addressed an energy controversy. Salazar says the future of offshore wind energy here in the U.S. does not hang on his decision about the Cape Wind project in Massachusetts. The Secretary spent much of yesterday touring the site of the proposed offshore wind farm on Nantucket Sound. Developers want to build 130 wind turbines there. Salazar says he also watched what he called a crimson sunrise on a beach where local Native American tribes hold their sacred rituals, and he met with tribal leaders who say the project would interfere with those ceremonies. Secretary Salazar says developing wind energy is of course important, but he also has to respect the rights of the first Americans. Salazar did encounter protesters from both sides of the issue along the way yesterday, but no matter what he decides on Cape Wind, he says there remain plenty of wind potential in other areas of the country.
And here on the Atlantic alone, we know from the experts that have looked at the wind potential, there is huge potential up and down the coast.
As we have reported, Ken Salazar is giving all of these sides a chance to come together and reach their own agreement on the future of Cape Wind. If not, he says he will make a final decision himself by sometime this spring. A commercial wind farm proposed along a scenic ridgeline on the Virginia-West Virginia border may now be dead. After a full year of controversy, Tazewell County, Virginia last night passed a ridgeline ordinance. And this move bars construction of anything taller than 40 feet without first receiving a special exemption. Ordinance opponents say the government should not restrict private property use, but supporters say that local residents are afraid the loss of tourism and property value from the intrusion of those huge turbines could have a negative effect on the area. These 60 turbines would have been strung along miles of East River Mountain ridgeline and eventually reached 400 feet in the air. The turbines were proposed by Dominion Energy and BP Wind Energy. Dominion says it is now considering its options. This morning, the head of the UN's Climate Change Panel is refusing to apologize for a 2007 report paragraph that claimed global warming could melt Himalayan glaciers by the year 2035. Rajendra Pachauri, chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and a Nobel Award winner, did admit the mistake had damaged the body's credibility. But he told the British newspaper The Guardian to, quote, "Look at the larger picture. Don't get blinded by this one mistake." He continued, "The larger picture is solid, it's convincing, and it's extremely important. How can we lose sight of what climate change is going to do to this planet?" Climate change skeptics have renewed their attacks on the IPCC report, which collated the work of hundreds of scientists worldwide. That renewed attack has come in the wake of stolen emails that appeared to show one team trying to skew the evidence for global warming. Other scientists recently flagged the paragraph on Himalayan glaciers, but Dr. Pachauri is fighting a claim that other research on potential devastation from climate change was manipulated. Cleaning up the wastewater from hydraulic fracking as it's known, is proving somewhat harder than anticipated. Natural gas drillers in Pennsylvania and West Virginia are using that technique to get natural gas out of the huge Marcellus shale. The technique has been used over the last decade in the South and West as well. It involves fracturing rock deep underground with sludge mixtures, and some of the water then comes back up with the natural gas. Well, drillers were recovering the water and trucking it to local sewage treatment plants around the Marcellus shale. But it turns out those plants can't clean up some of that briny wastewater and the contaminants, and they are tainting the drinking water downstream. Drillers are now working on developing technology to recycle water on site. Well, we'll take a look now at some of the events happening around the Washington, D.C. area on this Wednesday. First of all, at noon Eastern, Joe Rome moderates a discussion at the Center for American Progress. The topic today, the science of climate change. An hour later, at 1 Eastern, business leaders join Senator Maria Cantwell, calling on Congress to stand up to the big banks and get serious about controlling the commodities markets for consumer goods, and that includes energy commodities. That all takes place at 1 p.m. on Capitol Hill. And at 2 o'clock Eastern this afternoon, White House Climate Czar Carol Browner is delivering the keynote address at RETEC 2010. This is the Renewable Technology Conference taking place at the Washington Convention Center. Clean Skies News will be covering all three of these events, and you can find our coverage throughout the day right here on our website. In the meantime, that is it for this Wednesday morning edition of the Energy Report. Thanks for joining us here in the Energy News Center. If you have any suggestions or comments about our programming, you can reach us here in the nation's capital at contact@cleanskies.com. And you can also follow us throughout your day on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Tyler Suiters. We're glad you're with us. You're watching Clean Skies News.